Marcus Elroy Webb was 39 years old when his wife's family sat him down at a dining room table that wasn't his and slid a document across the lacquered wood like they were granting him a favor. He drove a 10-year-old Ford F-150 with a cracked dashboard and a missing hubcap on the rear left wheel. He wore the same 2 pairs of work boots on rotation. Her mother had called him salt of the earth at their first Thanksgiving dinner, and her father had smiled at this the way men smile when they mean something different entirely. Her friends called him Steady Marcus, which was not meant as a compliment, and Diane never corrected them. The marital agreement was 12 pages. It was designed to protect Diane's family money, a real estate portfolio, a lake house in the Carolinas, a collection of modest stock positions she had inherited from her grandfather. What none of them noticed, not Marcus's attorney who was not in the room, not Diane's father who had drafted the terms himself, and not Diane who sat watching Marcus the way a collector watches someone handle something fragile, was that Marcus had spent 11 years building something none of them had ever thought to look for. And what the agreement they were asking him to sign was about to do was give him the only legal tool he would ever need. The document would cost them $4.7 million they believed they were protecting. What they did not know, what no one at that table had thought to ask, was whose name appeared on the holding company that managed the commercial properties on 3 blocks of Charlotte's South End district, including the building where Diane's father held his downtown office lease. What happened next would dismantle everything they had spent a decade assembling, one quiet clause at a time. Before we jump into the story, comment where in the world you are watching from and subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you need to hear. The morning light came through the workshop window the way it always did in October, low and amber and patient, the kind of light that didn't ask anything of you. Marcus Webb sat on the workbench stool with a cup of coffee going cold beside him and a piece of quarter-sawn oak balanced across his knees, running his thumb along the grain the way his grandfather had taught him. His grandfather had worked 41 years as a Finnish carpenter in Charlotte and had built the dining table that still sat in Marcus's mother's house on Beatty's Ford Road. He used to say, "The wood already knows what it's meant to be. Your job is just to get out of its way." Marcus had heard this so many times as a boy that it had become something close to theology, patient, structural, true. Marcus Webb was a licensed structural engineer. He held dual certifications in commercial and residential load analysis. He had spent 11 years in the field before he transitioned into development, which was a quiet word for a thing that required both an understanding of how buildings stood and how the men who owned them moved money. He had spent those 11 years building things, bridges, retaining walls, drainage systems, and in the process had built something else alongside them, incrementally, in the way that only quiet men with long horizons could manage. The shop, where he sat on weekend mornings, was attached to the back of the house on Arden Way that he and Diane had bought together 4 years ago. He had renovated the kitchen himself. Every cabinet, every tile, the farmhouse sink he'd sourced from a salvage yard in Concord and reset twice to get the level right. Diane had posted photographs of the kitchen on her social media accounts and received 214 comments. She had not mentioned who built it. She appeared in the doorway at 8:15 with her phone in her hand and her coffee already half finished. She kissed the side of his head, which she did every morning, though lately the motion had the quality of a practiced thing, a habit maintained with the same energy one gives to making the bed, dutiful, automatic, pointing toward nothing. He noticed, without noting, that she was wearing a new fragrance, something darker than her usual one. She hadn't mentioned buying it. Only his private banking advisor and the 3 members of his LLC's registered agent knew what Marcus actually controlled. They were all people who understood that quietness in a man was not the same thing as smallness. He had met Diane at a structural inspection walkthrough 6 years ago. She was there representing her father's development company, which had hired his firm to certify a mid-rise they were considering purchasing. She had asked 3 good questions and laughed at something he said without performing the laugh, and by the second walkthrough he had found reasons to extend his notes. She had been warm and direct and certain in those days, and the certainty had been part of what drew him. He had married who she was then. He was still learning who she had become. The first signal came on a Tuesday. He was backing his truck out of the driveway when his eye caught the corner of an envelope that had fallen between the porch post and the mailbox housing. Cream-colored. No return address, sealed and addressed by hand to Diane. He didn't stop. He didn't retrieve it. He noted it the way he noted structural irregularities, quietly, precisely, without alarm. He drove to work thinking about the grain of the wood. An engineer did not guess. He measured. He documented. He built the picture from the evidence outward, not from the conclusion backward. Marcus had known this since he was 22 years old, sitting in a load-bearing mechanics course at NC State. And he applied it now with the same precision he gave to every problem with consequences. The first piece was not the envelope. The first piece was a date. He had come home from a site visit in Concord 3 weeks earlier, a 40-minute drive that should have taken an hour and a half in traffic, but the road had been clear and he'd made good time. He had pulled into the driveway at 4:40 in the afternoon. Diane's car was there. The house was quiet in the particular way that houses were quiet when the quietness was the point. He had stood in the kitchen for a moment and listened, and then walked back to his workshop and sat down and stayed there until she appeared at 6:15 with her hair down and a changed blouse and said she had been napping. He noted it. He noted the second blouse. He noted the 40 minutes. He noted the way she looked at him when she said it, not with guilt exactly, but with the focused quality of someone reading a room. 3 nights after the envelope, Diane left her phone on the kitchen counter when she went to shower, and it lit with a preview notification that Marcus read from across the room without moving toward it. He had good eyes. He had always had good eyes. The preview showed a name, B. Hargrove, and 4 words of a message he did not need to finish reading to understand. His hands didn't shake. He went to his laptop. He opened his secure drive. He began a folder and named it simply Documentation. Inside it, he placed a date-stamped note. Then, he began to go backward. The bank statements came first. The joint account that Diane managed, the one she handled because she said she was better at it, which she was. He had never disputed this. What she had never told him was that for the past 14 months, a recurring transfer of $1,500 had been moving from their joint account on the 14th of each month to an account he did not recognize. He found this in 11 minutes. He noted it. $21,000 over 14 months, moving in careful, below-threshold increments that would not trigger a bank alert. His face remained perfectly calm. He ran the receiving account number through a search and found it attached to a property listing, a furnished apartment in the South Park district. The lease signatory was a B. Hargrove. Marcus sat back in his chair and looked at the ceiling of his home office for a long moment. Bryce Hargrove was a commercial real estate broker. Marcus knew him by name because Hargrove's firm operated in the same general territory where Marcus's holding company had been quietly acquiring properties for the past 4 years. He was the kind of man who drove German cars and kept his name in places that made people feel they were standing near success. He was also, Marcus now understood, the man who had been using money from Marcus's joint account to cover his furnished apartment for over a year. She had been planning it for longer than 14 months. He could feel the shape of it, the way a structural engineer could feel the distribution of weight in a beam before the numbers confirmed it. He spent the next 3 evenings going backward through every shared document, every joint filing, every expense she had categorized and managed. He found $21,000 in direct transfers. He found $6,400 in miscoded expenses, dinners, hotels. A weekend that Diane had told him she spent with her college roommate in Asheville, now traceable to a Kiowa Island resort receipt from a shared card. He found a draft document in her email, which she had synced to their household cloud account without remembering, that contained language about separate asset protection and post-nuptial restructuring. She was building an exit. She had been building it for nearly 2 years. He moved with the same deliberate calm that had defined every calculated action of his professional life. He opened a new secure folder. He downloaded everything. He printed nothing yet. He picked up his phone and called one number. "I need an appointment," he said quietly. "Tomorrow, if you can." "Yes, bring everything." Her name was Patricia Odom, and she had been practicing family law in Charlotte for 27 years. She wore glasses on a beaded chain and kept a wooden bowl of hard peppermints on her desk, and had the particular quality of stillness that belonged to people who had seen every version of human calculation and been surprised by none of it. Marcus sat across from her on a Wednesday afternoon and laid the printed documentation on her desk in order: the transfers, the hotel receipts, the draft post-nuptial language, the cloud folder he downloaded, and a photograph of the envelope he had found by the mailbox, which he had retrieved and scanned without opening, because he was an engineer, and engineers did not disturb evidence before they had cataloged it. Patricia reviewed each page without expression. She turned to the final one, removed her glasses, and set them on the desk. "This is the post-nuptial language they were preparing," she said. Yes, she hadn't brought it to me yet. But they're going to. Her father will. Soon, Patricia nodded. She slid the papers into a neat stack. The transfers alone establish financial dissipation under North Carolina statute. Combined with the documentary evidence of the extramarital relationship, you're in a favorable position. She paused. "What I want to know is the asset situation. Your assets, specifically, not the joint account." Marcus was quiet for a moment. Then he reached into the interior pocket of his jacket and placed a different folder on the desk. Patricia opened it. She was still for longer this time. Then she looked at him over the rims of her glasses. "Mr. Webb, yes, these holdings." She turned a page. "This is the same district where the Hargrove firm operates." "It is." "And this property," she pointed to a line item. "This is the building where Thomas Wentworth Realty holds its offices." "It is." She set the folder down with great care. "Do Diane's parents know about any of this?" "No," Marcus said. "Nobody does, except my attorney and my advisor." Patricia looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, "You let them hand you that post-nuptial." "I let them hand it to me." A slow smile crossed her face, brief and businesslike. "Good," she said. "Don't sign anything yet. Let them feel like they have the advantage." She picked up her pen. "Real power operates in quiet rooms, Mr. Webb. Let's build your room." His Uncle Raymond lived in a brick house in Huntersville and had worked 30 years as a loan officer before retiring to tend a half-acre garden and a rotating cast of neighborhood complaints. He was 71 and had the kind of eyes that saw around corners, and he had never liked Diane's father, which he had expressed once and then declined to elaborate on. Marcus told him everything over coffee at the kitchen table on a Saturday morning, while Raymond's garden shed a thin curtain of October rain. Raymond listened without interrupting. When Marcus finished, Raymond turned his mug in his hands. Her father drafted the postnuptial himself? With his own attorney? Yes. Raymond looked out at the rain. Thomas Wentworth drafted a document to protect his assets from a man whose company is his landlord. He shook his head. Boy thinks he's teaching a lesson. He does. Raymond set his mug down. Your grandmother used to say that the most dangerous person in any room was the one who already knew the price of everything in it. He looked at Marcus. She meant that as a warning. I think for you it's a different thing. Marcus nodded. You go sign what they give you, Raymond said. Sign it exactly as they present it. And you make sure Patricia has everything she needs before that pen ever touches that paper. He paused. And Marcus? He waited until Marcus met his eyes. You've been building things your whole life. Bridges, systems, structures that hold. You built this too. Every piece of it. With your own hands. Don't let anybody tell you what it's worth. Preparation was the work. Marcus drove home in the rain and understood this. 3 days passed. Marcus came home each evening at his regular time. He made dinner twice. He asked Diane about her day. She described a lunch with her mother and a project at her part-time consulting work and a television program she'd been following, and he listened and responded and refilled her water glass and felt nothing of what he knew. She was performing for an audience that only existed in her own head. On Friday afternoon, Thomas Wentworth called and said he and his wife would be coming for dinner Sunday, and there was something they wanted to discuss with Marcus. He was affable on the phone in the way that men were affable when they were confident of the outcome. Marcus said he would look forward to it. He spent Saturday morning in his workshop, running oak through the planer, making the boards even and smooth. His hands knew the work. He let them do it. By Sunday morning, Patricia had filed 2 preliminary motions and assembled a documentation package that ran to 41 pages. Marcus had delivered 1 sealed envelope to be held by his registered agent and 1 sealed envelope to his building manager. He had also arranged for a specific set of financials to be printed and bound, clean, professional, date-stamped, the kind of document that a structural engineer presented when he was certain of his numbers. He was certain of his numbers. Real power operated in quiet rooms. He set the table himself that evening. He used the good plates. Thomas Wentworth arrived at 6 o'clock with his wife Carolyn and Diane at his side, which Marcus noted. They had all arrived together, from the same direction, which meant they had gathered beforehand. The dynamic of the room declared itself before anyone sat down. Thomas made small talk while Carolyn helped Diane clear the dinner plates. Marcus brewed coffee and brought it to the table without being asked. Then Thomas set a manila envelope on the table in front of Marcus and folded his hands and explained, with practiced gentleness, that this was simply a matter of protecting family assets that had been accumulated over generations. Nothing personal. Nothing that reflected any concern about Marcus as a man. Just prudent planning. He smiled in the way that men smiled when they meant something different entirely. Diane watched Marcus from across the table. Marcus picked up the envelope. He opened it. He turned the pages slowly, as though he were reading them for the first time. 12 pages. The language was tight. Diane retained full claim to her inherited assets, and any appreciation of those assets accrued during the marriage. Marcus waived all claim to the Wentworth family real estate holdings, and a schedule of defined contribution was attached if the marriage ended within 10 years. It was designed to leave Marcus with very little. He set it down on the table. "I'll need to have my attorney review this," he said. Thomas nodded, magnanimous, "Of course. Take your time." "She already has," Marcus said. There was a brief silence. "I brought my own document," Marcus said. He reached into the interior pocket of his jacket and placed a bound folder on the table beside Thomas's envelope. "I'd like you to take a look at it before we go further." Thomas opened it with the slightly amused expression of a man who expected to find something modest. The first page was the ownership structure of Webb Commercial Holdings, LLC, the North Carolina entity that Marcus had registered 8 years ago, which held interests in 14 commercial properties across the Charlotte metro area, assessed collectively at $4.7 million, with an annual net operating income of $380,000. The second page was the current lease agreement held by Thomas Wentworth Realty Group for their downtown Charlotte office suite. Signed, dated, rent schedule attached. The lesser was Webb Commercial Holdings, ALC. The third page was a summary of Hargrove Brokerage's current leasing situation, specifically the furnished apartment in South Park that was running on a month-to-month arrangement under a shell entity that Marcus's documentation team had been able to connect, through 2 days of careful research, to Bryce Hargrove personally. The apartment was in a building Marcus did not own, but the documentation attached to the page included the 14 months of transfers from the joint account, the hotel receipts, and a time-stamped excerpt from the draft postnuptial language that Diane had begun composing in their shared cloud account. Diane's expression changed at a pace Marcus could measure, from expectation to confusion to recognition, in the time it took Thomas to turn the second page. Thomas Wentworth set the folder down. His wife had gone still. "These are your holdings," Thomas said. It was not a question. "They are," Marcus said. "You own the building where my office is." "I do. Your lease renews in February. I wanted you to have that context." There was a long silence. Diane looked at Marcus with an expression he had not seen before. Not guilt, not fear. Something more complex than either of those. The expression of someone who had been doing geometry with the wrong numbers. Diane reached out and put her hand on the table. "Marcus, I want to explain," her mother said. "Diane, one word. Very quiet." Diane stopped. Marcus looked at her steadily. He did not raise his voice. "You didn't think to ask," he said. "Not in 6 years. Not once. You looked at the truck and the work boots, and you didn't think to ask." He paused. "I'm not angry about that. I want you to understand that. I'm clear. Those are different things." He stood. He gathered Patricia's bound folder. He straightened his jacket. "My attorney will be in contact on Monday. The financial dissipation claims are already documented. The postnuptial you drafted in our shared drive has been preserved. I'd recommend your father find a new office space by February." He looked at Thomas, who had not moved. "The market's competitive right now. Patricia Odom can recommend some listings if you need them." He walked to the door. He did not look back. The room behind him was very quiet. He drove home in the truck with the cracked dashboard and the missing hubcap and let the Charlotte night come in through the window, cool and unhurried, smelling of October. Some things, he thought, were worth the patience to build right. 8 months passed like water moving through a drainage system he had designed himself, smoothly, in the direction it was always meant to go. The divorce was settled without trial. Patricia had filed the dissipation claim before the Wentworths had time to restructure their position, and the documentation of the joint account transfers, combined with the evidence of the South Park apartment, had been sufficient to shift the equitable distribution table in Marcus's favor. The settlement included a return of $27,400 in documented dissipated assets and a clean separation of all interests. Thomas Wentworth Realty Group did not renew its downtown lease. They relocated to a smaller suite in Ballantyne. Marcus had a new tenant by March. Bryce Hargrove's brokerage lost 2 commercial listings when it became known, through the quiet kind of knowing that moved through professional circles, without anyone being able to point to its origin, that his business practices warranted scrutiny. He relocated to a smaller market in South Carolina. Marcus heard this third hand, registered it, and moved on. Diane was working in a marketing coordinator role at a mid-sized firm in the university area. Her parents had stopped attending the church they'd belonged to for 20 years when the minister's wife, who had been friends with Marcus's mother, began asking gentle questions at Sunday coffee hour. The social cost was quiet and total. Marcus bought a house on a half-acre lot in Davidson. A white Craftsman with a deep porch and a backyard that sloped toward a stand of oak trees. He had renovated the kitchen himself, better than the last one, because he had more time and knew more. He planted a Japanese maple in the front yard in April and watered it twice a week. Her name was Jade. She was a civil engineer with a firm that did municipal infrastructure work, and she had met Marcus through a professional association dinner where she had asked him 3 good questions about load transfer and laughed at something he said without performing the laugh. She came to the house on Saturday mornings and drank coffee on the porch while Marcus worked in the shop, and sometimes she came to the doorway and asked about what he was building, and he told her, and she understood. His portfolio had expanded to 16 properties by June. He was mentoring 2 junior engineers at a community college program his mother's church had connected him to. He had planted tomatoes along the back fence, and they were splitting at the seams with their own weight. One morning in late September, Marcus sat on the porch in the early light with his coffee and watched the Japanese maple turn. The first few leaves had gone amber at the edges, patient and certain, already knowing what they were becoming. Jade was inside. The house was quiet in the way that houses were quiet, when the quietness was its own kind of fullness. He had built everything worth keeping. He was free. He was solvent. He was unbothered. I hope you enjoyed that one. Be sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. I've picked out 2 more for you that I think you'll really like.